Hello, I just wanted to do a really brief podcast today on the significance of the Titanic as a symbol that's used by Priestley in And in Spectacles. We have the Titanic referenced by Mr. Burling in Act 1 when he is confidently discussing its speed, luxury and the fact that it is, quote, unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. This is when he's sort of showing off to Gerald and Eric. Now, for a 1912 member of the bourgeoisie, the arrogance and certainty of this man-made achievement would not be difficult to imagine. The Burlings are, of course, a microcosm of upper-class Edwardian society. So this attitude is obviously one that would have been common for men of that time and status. It's not just what Mr. Burling thinks. We can imagine that there are lots of people thinking the same way as him. What makes Mr. Burling's declaration so interesting is that the audience watching this isn't in 1912, it's in 1945. So they would be well aware of Mr. Burling's ignorance in this matter, as we know, on April 14th, 1912, the Titanic did in fact sink. This doesn't just show the audience that Mr. Burling is wrong in this instance, but it also sets him up as a character whose judgment we should question. If he's wrong about this, might he also be wrong about other things? For example, his anti-socialist stance. Titanic was a very significant event, and that combined with the outbreak of World War I really marks the end of the Edwardian era and its way of organising society. I talked about this a lot in a podcast I've made previously. The Titanic sinking represents the hubris, which is another word for pride, and arrogance of the upper class, who, despite feeling untouchable, were mere mortals. You know, they were just like everyone else when disaster struck. They weren't as invincible as they believed. Stephen Beale suggests that it can be interpreted as a socialist parable about the perils of capitalism. This is partially because it was the greed of the ship's owners pushing the ship to its absolute limits that may have played a part in it failing and sinking. One thing is certain, though, the divides of class and gender that we see in And in Spectacles were never more present than on board the passengers of the Titanic. So perhaps Priestley uses the disastrous ending of the Titanic as a metaphor for society's end should people continue to avoid his socialist movement. Okay, so even though that is just a really easy thing to remember, that small quote, unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable, it leads you into a really in-depth discussion of not only the character failings of Mr. Burling, but also those of the Edwardian society. So hopefully this will be helpful for you and your revision.
In the UK, in the years between 1910 and 1914, there was a strike movement of such proportions that it earned the label of the Great Unrest. Now, that term is disputed amongst historians, but I'm going to cheat, my first cheat of the afternoon, and I'm going to apply it indiscriminately to the entire series of events crossing Europe, America, Australia and South Africa during these years. Dick Geary tells us about Europe. He says, what contemporaries would have noticed more than any other thing about labour activity in the 3 decades before the First World War was the increase in the incidence of strikes and of their scale. There were a major series of strikes in France between 1905 and 1908, and again in 1910-12, in Germany between 1910 and 1914, as well as in Italy and Russia. Between 1902 and 4, there were general strikes in Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands and Sweden, and strikes reached a peak in Spain in 1913. In America, a rising tide of industrial action led to the establishment of a state commission on industrial relations, which some 20, 30 years later actually came to some conclusion in legislation to assist collective bargaining. Its history speaks of near anarchy and military rule in parts of America in the years 1910 to 1915. In 1910 alone, we saw the Bethlehem steel strike, a cloakmakers strike, the Chicago clothing workers strike, a Los Angeles strike wave, a general strike in Philadelphia. Somewhat later, in 1919, the government in Canada established a Royal Commission on Industrial Relations on foot of what was described as the Canadian Labour Revolt. So we see a pattern across continents, across countries, of workers struggling to establish a voice in a hostile capitalist society.
If I had to choose one word to describe World War I, it would be cataclysmic.
A single word to describe World War I would be catastrophic.
Transformational, because nothing was the same once the war was over.
I think the one word that helps to describe World War I is destructive.
I would choose the word mistake.
Stupid. That's how I would encapsulate the First World War. World War I did not have to happen. There was no inherent reason. It literally was dumb.
A person during World War I thought they were in a new age, a fascinating modern world, the world that produced the Titanic, aviation, and incredible advances in medicine. It seemed like everything was within grasp right before World War I. And all of these would be smashed on the battlefields of Europe.
From the very beginning of the road to war, to everything that comes out of the war and the peace plans, is not just one mistake, but a series of mistakes. People had the option to choose peace, and time and again seemed to make the wrong decisions.
It was lack of communication. It was intellectual rigidity. It was a simple falling of dominoes that never needed to fall. And so the children of the Renaissance and the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment ended up massacring themselves in the mud and blood of the trenches.
Not just destructive in terms of what happens to men's bodies on the battlefield, destructive in terms of global politics.
The Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the grievous weakening of the British and French empires. The world that existed in 1918 was remarkably different from the one that existed in 1914.
The whole globe was influenced by this war, and the transformational changes cover a wide range from technology and weapons. You see the first tanks, you see the maturation of artillery guns, machine guns, trench warfare. World War I begins the modern era.
Welcome to your weekly dose of education with Mr. Minute. In today's episode, we're exploring one of history's most transformative events, the Russian Revolution of 1917. Come with us as we explore the major changes that reshaped Russia and influenced the entire world. Background. Our story begins in early 20th century Russia, under the rule of Tsar Nicholas II. Despite its vastness and rich cultural heritage, Russia was a nation plagued by social inequality, poverty, and political stagnation. The majority of Russians were peasants, living in harsh conditions, while a small elite enjoyed immense wealth and power. Additionally, the First World War had drained the country's resources, leading to widespread discontent and despair. February Revolution. Things came to a head in February 1917. The people of Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, had reached their breaking point. Frustrated with food shortages, war casualties, and the indifference of the monarchy, They took to the streets in massive protests. These protests escalated into a full-blown revolution, forcing Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate and bringing an end to centuries of imperial rule. A provisional government was formed, but it was weak and struggled to address the nation's deep-rooted problems. October, Revolution. Amidst this chaos, the Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, began to rise in prominence. Lenin, a charismatic and determined leader, capitalized on the public's dissatisfaction. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks launched a coup against the provisional government, seizing power with remarkable ease. They promised peace, land, and bread, a simple yet powerful message that resonated with war-weary and impoverished Russians. Results: the Bolsheviks' ascent marked the beginning of communist rule in Russia. They embarked on radical reforms, redistributing land and nationalizing industry. However, not everyone supported these changes, leading to the Russian Civil War, a brutal conflict that lasted until 1923. The revolution's aftermath saw the formation of the Soviet Union in 1922, a new nation based on Marxist-Leninist principles. This marked a significant shift in the world's political landscape, setting the stage for the Cold War. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was about more than just political changes. It was a social and ideological earthquake that had far-reaching effects. It ended a monarchy, gave birth to the world's first communist state, and inspired countless other movements across the globe. Its legacy continues to influence global politics and thought to this day. Thank you for watching this episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating insights into history. See you in our next video.
In 1929, years of booming prosperity ended in catastrophe. It was the biggest stock market crash since records began.
It is impossible to underestimate the shock, a sense of stunned disbelief.
First-time investors borrowed huge amounts of money to speculate on the market.
The market broke very sharply and a lot of people were wiped out with it. It was very painful.
Later, thousands of banks failed. Millions lost everything.
The poverty was really all around us. It was really, really pitiful.
The crash was followed by a depression that spread across the world, lasted for a decade, and was a prelude to war. This is the story of a financial disaster that we hoped would never happen again. The Great Depression would last until the outbreak of World War II. Then, as now, the globalized economy meant that the crash and subsequent depression rippled out across the world. In Britain, there was a slump in manufacturing, and millions lost their jobs. Germany, still suffering from defeat in the First World War, was hit even harder.
So many people had their life savings destroyed during the Great Depression that it created in many countries a desire for some authoritarian government that would save them, that would rescue the economy.
No doubt that crash and the Depression strengthened anti-capitalist movements. The communists had taken over in Russia, and there were rising fascist movements. Mussolini was already in power in Italy, and Hitler's political base was growing in Germany. And when American-style free market capitalism suffered from this Wall Street crash followed by a depression, it just strengthened those people who wanted to say, there's a better way.
While communism and fascism prospered, many nations put up barriers to prevent free trade and turned inwards in an attempt to save their economies. Economic nationalism led to trade wars and later, World War.
bombers of World War II were a revolution in warfare, hitting the enemy deep behind the lines. Both politicians and generals were fascinated by the new weapon.
There are a lot of people who say that bombing can never win a war. Well, my answer to that is that it has never been tried yet, and we shall see.
Bombing brought about the first total war in history. Everyone was involved, everyone a target.
Engländer behaupten, das deutsche Volk wehrt sich gegen die totalen Kriegsmaßnahmen der Regierung. Es will nicht den totalen Krieg, sagen die Engländer, sondern die Kapitulation. Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg?
No one anywhere is safe from the bombs.
It may be the only contact.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the field and in the sky. I do not for a moment believe this island or a large part of it was subjugated and starved. Beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British people. We shall never surrender.
This country is at war with Germany.
America would never be the same. America would never be the same.
By 1943, women made up 1/3 of the American labor force. 20 million women were working outside the home, not just at typewriters and sewing machines. Many were doing jobs that had been considered exclusively male.
So she gave up her nylons for coveralls and gloves and put her heart into change. It all started a movement when she overcame her fears. America would never be the same. America would never be the same. America would never be the same.
Isn't this a funny place for you?
Not if it helps win the war.
But after clerking in a fashionable store...
I like it here, and it saves my clothes.
Yes, I suppose it would.
Did you ever try pleasing a bunch of women shoppers all day?
No, I never did.
Well, here I just have to please the boss, and he's a man.
And the work isn't too hard for you?
No, I used to work in a butcher's shop. I like this better. It's more excitement.
Isn't this pretty hot for you, Miss Spillane?
Well, I hear it gets kind of hot around the kitchen stove, too.
I never thought of that.
Yes, and it gets pretty hot out there in the South Pacific.
During the war, almost 15,000 American workers were killed or permanently disabled in industrial accidents. More than 3 million other men and women were injured. It was a dangerous environment, but that was something the government and the newsreels did not talk about very much. The emphasis was on patriotism and production, and in a manner peculiar to the times, sex.
Once upon a time, there were beauty parades. All the girls needed was youth and culture. But this is war. Today's beauty contests are in the shipyards, on the assembly lines. Here at Marine Ship, California, women welders have a lunchtime contest. Men workers vote on each girl's appearance, job record, and attendance. For now, Miss America is at work. The winner is expert welder Mrs. Gladys Griffin, mother of 2, and Mr. Griffin's in the service.
I felt really very spirited and very proud. I was very young, I was 18, and I felt something about camaraderie of workers, generally men and women, and especially sisterhood among women, that I have never encountered before or since, because it was a very special, special time. I remember feeling very good, and I felt good the whole time at doing this work that had traditionally been men's work, and I felt proud, and I felt able and capable, and that I did a good job, and that was true of all the women.
I know how the men felt. They really resented us invading their territory. That was my concept of what was going on, because a lot of us were young, and some of us weren't too bad looking, and they were very confused. And here were all these young girls and women coming into their territory and trying to do the same things they were doing. I feel that that was the beginning of women's liberation movement. Maybe they didn't realize it at the time, but it was, because we showed that we could do a man's job and that there weren't that many differences.
We were really good, you know. We were good at what we did. We felt good about what we were doing. And there was a special feeling, I think, among the women that we were part of this wonderful effort of building a ship, a beautiful ship, a raw hulk that became transformed into this beautiful, shining ship that then we would see go off the waves. It was a wonderful experience.
Welcome to the first episode in a series of videos on an inspector calls. These videos are intended to help you revise for your English Lit exam or for a controlled test you might be required to do in class. This video will focus on the author of the play, J.B. Priestley, and a little of his background information, what Britain was like in the spring of 1912 when the play is set, the key events between the years 1912 and 1945, with 45 being the year Priestley wrote the play, what had happened in this period to make him write something so critical of those in power. Finally, we'll briefly think about the question, what is the play, which should help you to understand its themes and characters more easily. So who was J.B. Priestley? He was a playwright, a novelist, and a broadcaster. He served in World War I and was wounded in 1916 by a mortar shell, so he had experience of bloody conflict. He wrote the play in Inspector Calls in 1945, in the last year of World War II, having experienced both world wars and some of the most disastrous world events in history. Politically, he was a socialist, which means he believed in a more equal economy so that a minority did not possess all the wealth. He was accused of having communist tendencies, which was not necessarily favourable in the years after World War II, as Western relations with the Soviet Union deteriorated into the Cold War. He later helped found the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, or CND, in 1958, which believes in the total ban of all countries from owning or proliferating nuclear weapons. Overall, he believed in peace and in the state helping the disadvantaged, poorer members of society to make life fairer and more equal for all. He blamed the ruling classes, those with power and money, during the period 1912 to 45 for the mistakes which led to 2 world wars in his lifetime. So what was Britain like in spring 1912, when the events in the Berlin household take place? Britain had been through an industrial revolution during the previous century, which saw a rapid expansion of big business, factories, and heavy industry. The construction of the ship the Titanic was seen by many as the pinnacle of British achievement and enterprise. Growth of large companies and factories had made a minority of people who owned them rich, like the family pictured here. These people are known as capitalists, and in the play, like Mr. and Mrs. Burling, are typically concerned with themselves and their immediate family, wealth, profit, and their public image and reputation. There was a large working class who often worked in these companies and were generally paid poorly and badly treated by the ruling classes who employed them. Trade unions were weak, and so workers had few rights and poor systems to protect them from being sacked, like Eva Smith is from Burling & Co. Those with money and power, like Mr. Burling, saw no reason to change society when it was making them rich. The inspector represents Priestley's opinion that this had to change. By 1945 there was a huge wave of support for this social change, and this happened to some extent when the Labour Party, who were socialist, came to power that year. So what had happened to change people's minds? The key events 1912 to 1945. The unsinkable Titanic hits an iceberg on its maiden voyage to New York in April 1912. War breaks out in 1914, World War I, and lasts for over 4 years. The Russian October Revolution takes place in 1917, apparently bringing the people to power. This was a socialist revolution which removed Russia's dictatorial ruling class. In Britain, the general strike took place in May 1926, which saw 1.5 million people refuse to go to work. The strike lasted 9 days and was a protest against falling wages and poor conditions for coal miners in particular. The above 4 events are all referred to by Burling at the start of the play in some shape or form, and he dismisses them all as impossible, which makes him look a fool to the audience. World War II started in 1939 and lasts for nearly 6 years, with millions dead across the globe. During this war, 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis, an act of genocide known as the Holocaust. Atom bombs were dropped on Japan in August 1945 to knock them out of World War II and finally bring the war to an end. Events during this period clearly represent some of the darkest in human history. An Inspector Calls was first performed in the Soviet Union in 1945 and in Britain in 1946, just after the last of these events had taken place. So with all this in mind, what is the play? Well, it's several things, but it's up to you to decide how you want to interpret it. It is Priestley's protest against the ruling class in 1912 and in 1945. He blames the rich and the powerful for the course of recent history. It is his call for change in the way that society and politics function. The play promotes the idea of socialism, collective responsibility, and compassion for other people. It paints the younger generation as a hope for a better future. Finally, the play is a warning to everyone of the mistakes of the past, and in this sense it still has an important relevance for us today. Thanks for watching this opening video in the Inspector Calls series. Tune in to episode 2, which looks at the play's structure. Bye for now.
Historical context. The First World War started in 1914, and an Inspector Calls was set 2 years prior to this in 1912. Although Burling is made to look foolish by his dismissal of the prospect of war and his claim that the Titanic was unsinkable, he would have had many good reasons to formulate his beliefs. Great Britain was a wealthy country and still had an empire. The likes of Arthur Burling had every reason to be happy with life, but for the likes of Eva Smith, it was a different story. The welfare state that Priestley himself helped to set up was not in existence, and there was very little in the way of employment laws to protect the likes of Eva. Whilst trade union membership grew rapidly between 1910 and 1914, commonly known as the Great Unrest, there were many casualties like Eva Smith who were fired for inciting strikes. Also, whilst the Liberal government at the time were beginning to address social inequality, much of the reform was aimed at men. Women did not get the vote until 1928, and consequently, they had very little influence within society. The play's first audiences in Moscow in 1945, and at the New Theatre in London in 1946, would have survived 2 world wars and revolution and unrest, which would make many of the inspector's speeches more relevant. In the UK, the play was performed following the defeat of Winston Churchill's Conservative Party to the recently formed Labour Party under Clement Attlee in the general election. The Labour Party had enjoyed a landslide victory presumably thanks to many men and women who had survived the wars and wanted to live in a more equal and fair society. From this point of view, an Inspector Calls would address many of the concerns that the audience would have. The new Labour government was committed to the social and economic reform that Priestley promotes and craves within his play.
Socialist educational supplement. Socialist educational supplement here, get it now. The term socialist is used to categorise the views of those who feel that land, capital and wealth should be evenly distributed amongst the wider community rather than amongst individuals. It's believed that the term came into popular use in this country following the Industrial Revolution, when there was a great shift from agriculture to modern industries. The development of industries such as coal, steel and textiles was widespread, and the men who had invested in these industries became very wealthy. The implementation of heavy machinery would often mean that people weren't in as much demand for work. Consequently, a vast divide in wealth began to develop. Naturally, the often impoverished landowners would not be happy with the turns in fortunes, and marriages between wealthy industrialists and the upper classes created new social positions. Berlin, despite being a fictitious character, is an example of this. In 1912, when the play was set, many of the working classes were feeling rather resentful of the huge difference in lifestyle and sought to strike for better paying conditions. Eva Smith's stand at the Berlin factory is representative of this. Priestley fought in the First World War and would no doubt have been extremely disappointed to return home to depression, strikes and hunger marches, and this is reflected in his writing. Priestley was actually one of the founding members of the Commonwealth Party in 1942. This organisation petitioned for the more equal division of land and capital and greater democracy. Whilst the party eventually joined forces with the Labour Party, it's understood that Priestley made some contribution to the development of the welfare state. Priestley made the decision to set the play in 1912 as this represented a time of great social unrest. Naturally, the ruling classes would be resistant to change, but by 1945, the two great wars had done away with many of the social pretences that antagonised the socialists. There were lessons to be learned from the recent fire and blood and anguish, and Priestley hoped that they would result in a more caring society. Now, if you'd like to buy one of these papers, Socialist Educational Supplement, Socialist Educational Supplement, get yours here.
In the same month that 100,000 people died in Hiroshima, the first audiences were queuing to see a controversial new play by J.B. Priestley, An Inspector Calls.
J.B. Priestley is now often handed down to us historically as a sort of rather genial, pipe-smoking traditionalist, whereas in fact in a lot of his work he was very much a radical. A lot of the theatre work is, for its time, incredibly extraordinary and experimental, and a lot of his writings and original prefaces to the play talk about a dream landscape.
Now an extraordinary production of the play is taking modern audiences by storm.
It's a bit like a great old masterpiece. What one's trying to do to a play like this is take away a lot of the grime and the dirt that have accumulated over the years and try to see the sharp, bright colours underneath.
Some people say war is inevitable. To that I say,
Fiddlesticks!
Nobody wants war, except some half-civilized folks in the Balkans.
Yes, I know.
To understand an Inspector Calls, we need to look at two periods of British history. 1912, when the play is set, and 1945, when the play was written.
40 or 45, we'll be living in a world to have forgotten all this capital versus labour agitations, and all these silly little war scares. There'll be peace, prosperity, and rapid progress everywhere.
1945 was the last year of the Second World War. During the war, Priestley had become well known to the British public through his morale-boosting radio broadcast that followed the BBC News every Sunday night.
And I asked myself earnestly, if the kindness of Britain is overshadowed by that vast, dark face, then we all might as well decide to leave this world, for it will not be a world worth living in.
He felt his writing was something he did in order to forward the war effort. But more than that, it was to try and ensure that the life after the war was better than it had been before. He was echoing the feelings of ordinary people, that there was generally a feeling of the need for change.
When the homeland is in danger and there's trouble in the air, we forget our little squabbles and its trespassers beware. All the nation is united when the danger looms in sight, and we march along together as we sing with all our might.
United we shall stand, whatever may befall, the richest in the land, the poorest of us all. We must all sing together, birds of a feather and the crowd will soon roll by.
The war dramatically altered the social face of Britain in many ways. The need for arms created full employment, and the morale and welfare of the workers became a national priority. The evacuation of children mixed classes together, and for the first time showed people how the other half lived. The classes were also mixed together in the armed forces. Uniforms and clothes rationing meant everybody looked the same. People were given a vision of how a truly socialist Britain might be, if Britain could survive.
Now they're going into the public shelters. This is not a pleasant way to spend the night, but the people accept it as their part in the defense of London.
Britain did survive. The war was over. But what should Britain do now? Priestley caught the mood in his famous radio broadcast, Journey into Daylight.
We lived at last in a community with a noble common purpose. We had a glimpse then of what life might be if men and women freely dedicated themselves not to their appetites and prejudices, their vanities and fears, but to some great communal task.
Immediately after the war, there was a general election. Winston Churchill, the hero of the war, expected to win, but he underestimated the desperate need for change in the war-battered population. People wanted a new Britain. The Labour candidate, Clement Attlee, won a landslide victory and moved into number 10.
Sir, an inspector's called.
Does he want to see me?
Yes, sir. Says it's important.
All right, then, just show him in here. Give us some more light.
Priestley set his play in 1912 because that era represented the very opposite of what people were hoping for in 1945.
2 hours ago, a young woman died in the infirmary. She was taken in this afternoon because she'd swallowed a lot of strong disinfectant. Burnt her inside out, of course. Oh, my God. Yeah, she was in great agony. They did everything they could for the infirmary, but she died. Suicide, of course.
Yes, yes, horrible business, but I don't understand why you've come here.
The play is about, do we return back to the values of an Edwardian era, or do we move forward? The actual night that the play is set on is the night that the Titanic sunk, the great celebratory moment of the great dream which was about to collapse.
I remember it quite clearly now. She was a lively, good-looking girl. Country bred, I fancy. She'd been working in one of my machine shops for over a year. Good worker, too. In fact, the foreman there told me was ready to promote her into what we call a leading operator, head of a small group of girls. But when they came back from their holidays that August, they were all rather restless. And they suddenly decided to ask for more money. Well, they're averaging 22 and 6 a week, which is neither more nor less than is paid generally in our industry. They wanted the rate raised, so they would average about 25 shillings a week.
8 million people were living on incomes of less than 25 shillings. That's £1.25 a week. Millions were underhoused, underfed, and under the thumb. Working women were at the bottom of the pile.
Goods were churning out of the factories, and we were so successful. And we were successful because we kept, as he says in the play, the prices high, but the wages were kept low.
So they all went out on strike. Didn't last long, of course.
Not if it was just after the holidays. They'd be all broke if I know them.
Quite right, Gerald. They mostly were. So was the strike after a few weeks. Pitiful affair.
Mr. Burling's complacency was misplaced. The labour force was on the move and finding its voice. On March the 1st, 1912, 1 million miners went on strike. At the time, the most complete industrial stoppage in British history.
Gerald Croft is an aristocrat. The idea of labour, strikes, the growth of the working class is an appalling idea. I think he finds it completely outrageous that there is such a movement existing.
Britain was divided and ruled by class. The upper class, they owned most of Britain and earned most of the money. The working class, the Eva Smiths, paid the price.
Eva Smith. She was one of them. She'd had a lot to say, far too much. So she had to go.
You couldn't have done anything else.
He could. He could have kept her on instead of throwing her out. I call it tough luck.
Rubbish! If you don't come down sharp on some of these people, they'd soon be asking for the earth.
I should say so.
They might, but after all, it's better to ask for the earth than to take it!
Edna represents the underdog. She has to obey the Burlings. She has to agree with them. She must never question what they say or do, because they are her bread and butter. It's not easy to get a job, particularly at her age, and if she didn't get another job, it would be the workhouse. And the workhouse in those days was a desperate place.
Some writers were concerned about the way people were living and the appalling social conditions at the time.
But you three youngsters, just remember what I tell you now. We can't let these Bernard Shaws and these H.G. Wellses do all the talking.
For the vast majority, there was little education and little or no sanitation, no dole to fall back on, and no National Health Service to rely on. In Edwardian Britain, the two worlds of rich and poor rarely met.
I went to the manager at Millwoods and I told him that if he didn't get rid of that girl, I'd never go near the place again. And I persuaded Mother to close our account with them.
And why did you do that?
Because I was in a furious temper.
And what had this girl done to make you lose your temper?
When I was looking at myself in the mirror, I caught sight of her smiling at the assistant. I was furious with her.
I think that she spends a great deal of time in and out of dress shops, making herself look presentable to get the right husband. She wouldn't have learned any other skills or anything, so it's just about being a wife, really. And that's what she's about to do, until the inspector turns up.
So you used the power you had as the daughter of a good customer and also of a man well known in the town to punish the girl just because she made you feel like that?
Yes, but it didn't seem to be anything very terrible at the time. Don't you understand? It's the only time I have ever done anything like that. And I'll never do it again. To anyone.
The best thing about it is her curiosity. She wants to learn and know more, which is her saving grace, really.
For women like Sheila, the route to a good life lay in marrying the right man. Outside the home, however, women were powerless. They couldn't vote. Emily Pankhurst began to change all that in 1903 with the suffragette movement. Through a campaign of sustained civil disobedience, hunger strikes and demonstrations, suffragettes fought vehemently for the right to vote. In 1913, one suffragette was killed throwing herself under the King's horse at Ascot. Sheila Burling wouldn't have been a suffragette before the inspector called, but after, she might well have taken up the banner, much to her mother's disgust.
Mrs. Burling, you're a prominent member of the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation, aren't you?
She thinks she does good, sitting on this committee. She's a do-gooder, you know, in her head.
And naturally, that was one of the things that prejudiced me against her case.
I should think so too, damned impudence!
You admit to being prejudiced against her case?
Oh, yes, yes.
Like, there's nothing wrong with being prejudiced against this. Yes, yes. And the daughter, my daughter says...
Look, she's just died a horrible death, Mother. Well, I'm very sorry. But I think she had only herself to blame.
Was it owing to your influence as the most prominent member of the committee that help was refused the girl?
Possibly.
Was it or was it
Yes, it was. I didn't like her manner.
The philanthropic charity groups barely scratched the surface of the problem and merely served to ease the consciences of the privileged few. Any measure which really addressed the problem, a few shillings a week more for Eva Smith, would horrify them.
You have no power to make me change my mind.
Yes, I have.
No, you haven't. Simply because I've done nothing wrong, and you know it.
I think you've done something terribly wrong, and that you're going to spend the rest of your life regretting it. I wish you'd been with me tonight in the infirmary. You'd have seen...
Please! I've imagined it enough already.
Then the next time you imagine it, just remember that this girl was going to have a child.
No!
Eva Smith took her own life rather than face the only avenue left open to her. With no social safety net, many women were driven into prostitution. For Eric, women like Eva were only good for entertainment. For upper class and lower class to marry each other would have been scandalous. Had he married her, polite society would have been outraged.
Look, I wasn't in love with her or anything, but I liked her. She was pretty and a good sport.
So you had to go to bed with her?
He knows that sort of judgment day is coming, and he has to come back and confess to what he's done.
Remember what you did, Mrs. Burling. You turned her away when she needed help most. You refused her even the pitiable little bit of organized charity you had in your power to grant her. Remember what you did.
My God, I'm not likely to forget.
Just used her for the end of a stupid drunken evening as if she was a thing, an animal, not a person. No, you won't forget.
I know. I had her turned out of a job. I started it.
You helped, but you didn't start it. You started it. She wanted 25 shillings a week instead of 22 and 6. You made her pay a heavy price for that, and now she'll make you pay a heavier price still.
In a sense, it's an idealistic play. It says, if people were able to do their best and lead the best lives, things would be much richer in a deeper sense for everybody than, for instance, just grubbling for money. And so that's why the play, in a sense, is always relevant. He was, in some way, the conscience of the nation.
We don't live alone. We are members of one society. We are responsible for each other. And I tell you, the time will soon come when if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish.
In 1914, Edwardian Britain was shattered forever by the First World War.
Sheila will be working in the hospital, she'll be working in the factory, she'll be doing everything she could to support the war effort. She'll definitely roll up her sleeves and get right down there and muck in.
I think he'd die really sort of stupidly and embarrassing. He'd skewer himself or die of food poisoning or something like that in his own trench.
I think Gerald would have had a very comfortable post, many miles from the trenches, moving things about on a board and not getting his hands too dirty.
Yes, I see.
I think Gerald could change, but he doesn't. He's betraying his whole class if he changes.
No girl has died in there today. They haven't had a suicide for months.
Which is why he finds every reason he can why the inspector is a fake.
Sheila, at the very end of the play, she's desperate for change and she wants everyone else to change with her. I do find the play optimistic. You know, she's now going to take responsibility for her position in society, which is pretty good news.
I don't think he's learned anything. The young win, there's no question about that, and the old lose.
That was the police. Girl has just died on the way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant. The police inspector's on his way here to ask some questions.
The question for the first audiences in 1945, as they left the theatre, was what sort of world would they go out and build? Priestley gave them the answer.
We had a glimpse then of what life might be if men and women freely dedicated themselves not to their appetites and prejudices, their vanities and fears, but to some great communal task.
Exits and entrances. An Inspector Calls is a well-made play. As such, exits and entrances are important dramatic devices within it. In order to heighten the suspense, tension and dramatic action, entrances and exits are perfectly timed within the play. It is important to note that not all of the characters are on stage all of the time, and, as a result, much of the information in the investigation is revealed when certain characters are off stage. In other moments, characters and groups of characters often exit the stage, leaving two or more characters on stage for private conversations. During these conversations, aspects of character, personality, and opinions and attitudes are revealed, all of which develop the play's plot and themes. For example, as Act 1 draws to a close, the inspector leaves the stage to allow Gerald and Sheila to respond to the revelation of Gerald's affair. He returns right at the very end to once again take command of the stage, asking, "Well?" Exits are sometimes staged in order to create suspense. For example, in the middle of Act 1, the audience are left wondering why Sheila has run off stage crying. Clearly, Sheila recognised the woman in the photograph, and this knowledge builds tension as the audience wonder what part she had to play. Undoubtedly, the most important entrance in the play is that of the inspector himself. It is through this entrance that Priestley establishes the inspector's character as a key one and also establishes the tone of his own political views. The opening of the play quite simply sets the scene of the occasion in the Burling household. The audience quickly learn a lot about the character of Burling in particular due to the amount he actually says. He has several extended speeches, even though he is mildly rebuked by both Sheila and his wife for talking too much. However, it is during one of these speeches that he clarifies his political views to both the characters on stage and the audience, and sets himself up as the direct opposite of everything that Priestley stands for. It is because of this that the inspector's entrance cuts him off and effectively silences him. We hear the sharp ring of a front doorbell, just as Burling is saying that a man needs to
look after himself and his own.
In doing this, Priestley also establishes the inspector as a character who will have control and authority within the play. Indeed, the inspector largely assumes responsibility for who enters and exits the dining room at key moments in the play. Characters often enter as they are about to be interrogated, following the inspector's rule of
one person and one line of inquiry at a time.
This gives the audience a chance to digest the information about each character's flaws and their part in the death of Eva Smith. There are many examples of this, but perhaps one of the most dramatic moments in the play comes from Eric's return at the end of Act 2. He enters just as the inspector has tricked Mrs. Burling into condemning the father of Eva Smith's unborn child. The audience and the characters on stage realise that Eric is the father, and we are keen to see his reaction. We should also not forget the inspector's final exit, following on from his speech about the family's collective responsibility. As it becomes clear that the inspector is not what he seems, his absence from stage suggests a greater power and insight than might be humanly possible, and the audience are left to wonder and think. Lighting. The lighting of a play is often left to the directors and designers of the production. Priestley, however, in his stage directions, makes some very clear instructions about how the lighting should appear on stage. Priestley states that the lighting should be pink and intimate until the inspector arrives, and then it should be brighter and harder. The explanations for this are linked to our associations with colour. The pink and intimate lighting is a flattering light designed to make things look as pleasant as possible. The pink would also suggest a warm glow that we might expect from the close family we expect the Burlings to be. Given that Priestley has informed us earlier in the stage directions that the home is not cosy and homelike, it is almost as if the pink lighting is trying to gloss over something, and this becomes more obvious as the play unfolds. A bright light will reveal much more than an intimate light. It will show things that are normally hidden. This is obviously the case within the Burling household. When the inspector arrives on stage, he is there to interrogate the Burlings and Gerald Croft, and, in doing this, he is figuratively shining a bright and hard light on each character to show both the audience and the characters themselves the effect of their actions. We can see the flaws in their characters. We can see the flaws in their relationships with one another, and, crucially, the inspector's bright, hard light enables us to see clearly. It exposes every character on stage, and we come to understand that for all of their money, status and power, indeed because of their money, status and power, the Burlings and Gerald Croft not only have their faults, but they are at fault. Dramatic irony. Put simply, dramatic irony is a situation whereby the audience is aware of something that one or more of the characters on stage are not. Dramatic irony is used in all kinds of theatre, from pantomime.
He's behind you!
Oh, no, he isn't!
Oh, yes, he is!
Oh, no, he isn't!
Oh, yes, he is!
In this example, a type of dramatic irony is used to provide humour. Strictly speaking, it's not proper dramatic irony because everyone, audience and all actors, know the convention and will be in on the joke. Shakespeare used it as a dramatic device to make his plays more interesting and to establish genre. For example, in Romeo and Juliet, the audience know that Juliet isn't really dead when Romeo returns to Verona, but Romeo does not know this. In Othello, the audience know that Desdemona hasn't been unfaithful, whereas Othello himself does not. In both of the Shakespeare examples, dramatic irony is used to add tension and drama to the plot. It can also help the audience engage with and stay interested in the characters. For example, in the popular sitcom Friends, the viewers always know how the characters of Ross and Rachel feel about each other. They, on the other hand, don't always realise. The most obvious way that J.B. Priestley makes use of dramatic irony is to make the character of Burling look foolish and to add credibility to the inspector. During one of his speeches in Act 1, Burling says that
there isn't a chance of war,
and also that the Titanic is
absolutely unsinkable.
As the play was set in 1912, but first performed in 1946, the audience would be very much aware that there had in fact just been 2 world wars, and the Titanic Responsibility. One of the main themes in An Inspector Calls is responsibility. As a socialist writer, Priestley sought to teach the message that we are all part of society and, as such, that we should look after one another, that we have a shared responsibility. Therefore, the play's theme of responsibility is linked closely to Priestley's socialist anti-capitalist views. The inspector's purpose in the play is to persuade each member of the family to acknowledge and share responsibility for their part in Eva Smith's death. He acts as a mouthpiece for Priestley and attempts to make the Burlings and Gerald Croft stand up to their responsibilities. This is made explicit in Act 3 when he says,
"You'll be able to divide the responsibility between you when I've gone."
The audience too are meant to learn from the play. As we watch, we are given the opportunity to judge the characters, to recognise the traditional selfish and conservative characters who refuse to accept responsibility, and to compare them to the characters who are more willing to consider their actions and the effects of their actions. Early in Act 1, Burling makes his position quite clear when he derides the notion of
community and all that nonsense.
Elsewhere in the play, he scoffs at other socialist writers, Wells and Shaw, and mocks the inspector for talking like a socialist crank. Burling's idea of duty and responsibility is to one main thing: profits. He has worked hard to make his own way in life and, like a typical self-serving capitalist, fails to see why others can't do the same, and, when questioned by the inspector, remains adamant.
I can't accept any responsibility.
In contrast, and from the outset, Sheila is alert to the inspector's intentions and ideas.
You talk as if we were responsible.
Further, and prior to being questioned, she interrupts her father and admits to being responsible.
He says it's one of us now.
Sheila's treatment of Eva Smith is linked more to aspects of personality, her temper and jealousy. That said, money, power and business are evident here too. She threatens to close their account at Millwards. Unlike her father, however, and as her story is revealed, Sheila's reaction is telling.
So I'm really responsible?
When considering the theme of responsibility in Gerald, the issue becomes more complex. Gerald's intention, merely to help Eva Smith or Daisy Renton, is accepted as genuine. Though Gerald uses his position of power, his wealth, his connections, in his dealings with Daisy Renton, he uses them in a positive way, to help her. He gives her money, and a place to stay when she's penniless and homeless. It is perhaps for this reason, Gerald's selflessness,
I didn't ask for anything in return,
that the inspector does not force Gerald to admit responsibility in the same way as he challenges the other characters. That said, and despite his clear sense of remorse, it must be noted that Gerald, like the older Burlings, has a selfish instinct for self-preservation too, something that is revealed both before he is questioned and after the inspector has left, and also in his dismissal of Daisy Renton when he ends their affair. When questioned by the inspector, and like her husband, Mrs. Burling refers to duty. Her sense of duty and responsibility are linked to her sense of propriety, and also her derision and contempt for the working classes. These ideas are given vent as she exerts her power over the committee. Further, and in view of Eva Smith's plight, her responses and reactions are particularly cold-hearted. She asserts unashamedly,
I accept no blame for it at all.
Instead, she is quick to condemn others and looks elsewhere to lay the burden of responsibility. Firstly on Eva Smith herself, and then on the father, of whom she becomes increasingly damning.
It's his responsibility.
When Eric is revealed as the father, Priestley exposes Mrs. Burling's hypocrisy and cruelty and condemns her selfish, cruel attitude. Like his sisters, Eric's responses and reactions to the inspector's revelations show a sense of remorse, sympathy, and a burgeoning sense of responsibility. Priestley makes his initial reaction to the details of Eva Smith's suicides instinctive when he blurts out an involuntary,
"My God!"
He's also shown to be in conflict with both his father and Gerald on matters of business and profits, so there is a suggestion of fairness in many of his comments which further suggests a move towards accepting wider responsibility. That said, there was nothing fair about Eric's treatment of Eva Smith. His actions, there is the suggestion of rape and the theft of money, are the only actions that could, at the time, have resulted in criminal prosecutions. Initially, he blames his mother.
You killed her!
But as the play draws to a close, he increasingly realises the truth of his involvement, and, unlike his parents and Gerald, does not attempt to wriggle out of the situation.
The fact remains that I did what I did.
Throughout the play, the inspector himself makes several statements on the issue of responsibility that are intended to have an impact on both the characters and audience. This is particularly true of his final speech, where he states,
There are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, all intertwined with our lives and what we think and say and do.
In his closing message, it is clear that the characters and audience alike are meant to consider their treatment of others and take responsibility. The tone of his speech turns to that of a stark warning.
We don't live alone. We are members of one body. We are responsible for each other. And I tell you that the time will soon come when, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish.
The warning issued by the inspector would have resonated deeply with contemporary audiences who will have experienced and lived through the
fire and blood and anguish
he refers to. In this way, Priestley lends validity to the inspector's opinions regarding a shared responsibility. Class. Social class is where we group people into sections of society, normally according to their wealth and power. In the United Kingdom, the Queen would naturally be at the top of the class system, followed by the Lords, who would represent the upper classes. In a traditional sense, one wouldn't be considered truly upper class unless one was born into it. During the Victorian era, from the 1830s to the early 1900s, many industrialists began to acquire substantial sums of money and looked to attain the status of the upper classes through knighthoods or marriage. Class is a crucial theme in An Inspector Calls, as it underpins the views of the main characters. If we look at the stage directions where we are told that Sybil Burling is her husband's social superior, it is clear that this information...
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution, and 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, Here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976 they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
The same works for Priestley's purpose. Now, when we start talking about Priestley's purpose, we're moving into the A grade. Okay? He's a socialist. A socialist believes that a society should be organised so that we all help each other. So we have unemployment benefit. We have free healthcare. We have free schools. Yet, society works because we all help each other. That's a socialist view. When Priestley's writing this play, not everyone does get welfare. There is no National Health Service when he writes this play. This is a socialist idea. Or you could argue, no, the play doesn't show that. Actually, it shows that he's a Christian. This idea of all helping each other in the play is presented in the language of the church. We are all of one body. And that deliberate language you use in the church service. Well, why does he do that? Most of the people who go to see his play also go to church. He's talking to them in a Christian language that they understand.
Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Salas. Is Amy Hester here?
She should be.
Amy Hester,
Okay.
you have a meeting with Mrs. Harrison?
I'll send you the video, Amy. Thank you. He's also a dramatist. Thank you. Look at the way he structures the play to build on surprises. You know, he makes Sybil Burling condemn the young man who got Eva pregnant. He is the guilty party. And he makes that happen before we find out it was Eric. And very cunningly, through how she describes this young man, stealing money, being drunk, we gradually get to, oh, it was Eric. Sheila gets to, oh, it was Eric. The audience are there before Sybil Burling is. Yeah, that's dramatic irony, that's dramatic tension. Look at the way he uses the photographs. He lets Burling see the photograph, but he won't let Gerald and Eric see it. And it introduces the possibility that he's manipulating them. It's not the same girl. That's possible. All the time, he's thinking as a dramatist. And then look at the change at the end. They think they've got away with it, there's nothing to worry about, and suddenly there's the new phone call. And someone else has died. And the inspector may be supernatural. Well, he's called Ghoul. That's a big clue that he may be supernatural. Another big clue is that as soon as Burling says it was nothing to worry about, there's a new phone call. Can that just be coincidence? And what's more, it's not just a new phone call, it's the news that a girl has died and an inspector's coming. You know, a real person would really struggle to arrange that, wouldn't he? So here's the A-star idea for you. What if the inspector is a supernatural being who has actually killed a girl in order to teach the Burlings a lesson? You know, it's like going to war, isn't it? We kill in order for a greater good. What if the inspector has actually done that? That's an A-star idea which you can consider. Say, no, I don't agree, or yes, I do. If you put it in, you'll get the grade. So, what quotations could we use? Well, Gerald says, we're respectable citizens. He wants the inspector to go away. The inspector says, sometimes there's not as much different as you think. He's trying to suggest that the rich are no better than criminals. And that's a socialist message. Yeah, you're only looking after yourself. If he's Christian, I've already talked about that language. We're all members of one body. You look at the rest of the quotation. Mill and Connor, I need you to calm down. I'm going to send you out. Sorry, okay? We're members of one body. We're responsible for each other. If men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Yeah, so the message is, you will go to hell. Thank you. Please don't. Yeah, you will go to hell if you don't learn the lesson I'm speaking. You can see him as a socialist or you can see him as a Christian. If you want the A grade, you talk about both. So, there's the inspector. What do we make of him? Well, I've already talked you through that, so I won't dwell on it. Advice from the examiner. Put up with it. Yeah, every time I have to stop, people aren't learning. I would be really grateful if you don't interrupt. Joe? Thanks. Right, this is what the examiner says to you. This is really important. They say this every year. They say, look, pupils write about the characters as though they're real people. They're not real people. They're this word. They are a construct. And he wants you to see or she wants you to see the characters like this. This is someone I've created. And I build that character up and get them to do different things in order to show you what I want you to see and learn the message I want you to get. Yes, so I create Sheila in order to be vain and jealous, to show you what effect that has on people. And I create Burling to show you what greed and avarice for money is like and what effect that has for people. And I create all the Burlings to show you what the upper classes are like. Yeah, they are constructed. And once you start using that language, that it's there for Priestley's purpose, you can't get less than a B. We're talking about why he's constructed that character. The play is a performance. So I've talked about how he organises the drama to help you see that. Don't forget that. Put it somewhere in your essay. The effect on the audience, on us, on we. That's going to get you at least the B.
Act 1 Summary. An Inspector Calls is a play set in real time insofar as there are no time lapses, a bit like the modern American drama 24. There is only one setting, and that is the dining room of the Burlings' wealthy upper middle class household. The play opens as the curtain rises on that room and shows the Burlings in the midst of celebrating their daughter Sheila's engagement to the wealthy Gerald Croft, who is a rival to the Burlings in business. The conversation is light-hearted, as one would expect from such an occasion. Gerald is attempting to make himself at home within his new family. Sheila is teasing him for working too hard, not spending much time with her during the previous summer. Eric seems uncomfortable. Mrs. Burling is simply following her role as the lady of the household, while much of the dialogue comes from Burling, who is clearly trying to impress Gerald Croft, who is his social superior. As the female characters leave the stage, Burling continues to talk and tell Gerald and Eric that a man needs to
look after himself and his own.
Up until we hear the sharp ring of the doorbell and the inspector arrives. The family do not yet know, but the inspector is there to question them about their part in the death of a young girl. Each character reacts differently on learning of their contribution. During Act 1, the inspector first quizzes Burling about his sacking of a young girl named Eva Smith. Burling insists he has done nothing wrong and attempts to intimidate the inspector, unsuccessfully, by mentioning his position and his influential friends. Sheila then returns and on learning of what's happened shows some sympathy for the girl, as does Eric. However, Sheila is the subject of the next line of inquiry, and we learn that she rather spitefully got Eva Smith a sack from her job at Millward's department store, where she had found employment after a dismissal from Burling's factory. Following the inspector's questioning of Sheila, he tells the others that the girl then changed her name to Daisy Renton, at which point Gerald is startled. The inspector leaves the room to allow the audience to watch Sheila doing a little interrogation of her own regarding how Gerald came to know the girl. Just as Gerald is attempting to persuade Sheila to support him and ignore the fact that he has clearly had some sort of affair with the girl, Sheila insists that he should come clean, as she is aware that the inspector knows, as she says,
"And I hate to think how much he knows that we don't know yet."
Just as Sheila has finished her outburst, the inspector returns to the room, asking simply,
"Well?"
as the curtain falls.
An Inspector Calls is a play by J.B. Priestley, first performed in 1945 but set in 1912. It is a mystery drama that explores themes of social responsibility, class, and the interconnectedness of society through the investigation of a young woman's death. The play takes place in the Burling family home in Brumley, a fictional industrial city in England. The Burlings, a wealthy, upper-middle-class family, are celebrating the engagement of Sheila Burling to Gerald Croft, the son of a prominent business rival. The festivities are interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Inspector Goole, a mysterious and authoritative figure who is investigating the suicide of a young working-class woman named Eva Smith. Inspector Goole methodically questions each member of the Burling family and Gerald Croft, revealing that all of them had interactions with Eva Smith that contributed to her tragic demise. Arthur Burling, the patriarch and a prosperous businessman, had fired Eva from his factory for demanding higher wages. Sheila Burling, his daughter, had Eva dismissed from her next job at a department store out of jealousy and spite. Gerald Croft, Sheila's fiancé, had an affair with Eva, but ended it abruptly. Sybil Burling, Arthur's wife, had refused Eva financial assistance when she sought help from a charitable organisation Sybil chaired. Finally, Eric Burling, the Burling's son, confesses that he had a relationship with Eva, during which he stole money to support her when she became pregnant with his child. As Inspector Goole probes each character's involvement, he exposes their moral failings, selfishness, and lack of empathy. The inspector emphasises the need for social responsibility and warns of the consequences of ignoring it, suggesting that all individuals are part of a larger community and are responsible for one another. After Inspector Goole leaves, the family begins to question his legitimacy, particularly when they discover that no one at the local police station knows of an Inspector Goole. A phone call to the infirmary reveals that no young woman has died by suicide that day. This revelation leads Mr. Burling, Sybil, and Gerald to dismiss the inspector's visit as a hoax and relax in their relief. However, Eric and Sheila, who have been most affected by the inspector's revelations, remain troubled by their actions and insist on taking moral responsibility. Just as the family begins to feel at ease again, the phone rings. The police announce that a young woman has just died by suicide, and an inspector is on his way to question them, leaving the audience with a sense of suspense and the possibility of a repeat of events. Social responsibility. The central theme of An Inspector Calls is social responsibility. Inspector Goole represents the voice of social conscience, challenging each character and the audience to consider their moral duties toward others. The play critiques the lack of empathy and accountability shown by the wealthy and privileged. Class and social inequality. The play explores class divisions and social inequality. Eva Smith symbolises the working class, and her mistreatment by the Burlings reflects the exploitation and disregard faced by many in lower social classes. The Burlings' sense of superiority highlights the entrenched class prejudices of early 20th century Britain. Guilt and conscience. Priestley examines the different reactions to guilt and responsibility among the characters. While Sheila and Eric feel genuine remorse and seek to change, Mr. and Mrs. Burling and Gerald are more concerned with protecting their reputations. This contrast emphasises the generational divide and varying attitudes towards social change. The illusion of respectability. The play critiques the superficial nature of respectability. the Burlings outwardly present themselves as upstanding citizens, but the inspector's inquiry reveals their moral hypocrisy and self-interest. Priestley suggests that true integrity lies not in social status, but in one's actions and empathy toward others. The role of time. The play's structure challenges the concept of linear time. Inspector Gould's visit seems to foretell future events, creating a sense of dramatic irony. The repetition of the inquiry at the end suggests that the Burlings may face the consequences of their actions again, regardless of their attempts to evade responsibility. In conclusion, An Inspector Calls is a powerful critique of social attitudes, challenging the audience to consider the impact of their actions on others. Through the mysterious Inspector Gould, Priestley encourages a shift toward greater empathy, responsibility, and social awareness.
Act 2 Summary. This act opens where the last one closed, with the inspector repeating his question,
"Well?"
This is then followed by some stern words between Gerald and Sheila, who insists that she wants to stay to hear about Gerald's part in the death of the young girl, so that she knows at least that she's not completely to blame. At this point, Mrs. Burling enters the room and attempts, again unsuccessfully, to bully the inspector by calling him impertinent. However, Sheila leaps to the inspector's defence and warns her mother to be careful. Gerald reveals how he met Daisy Renton at the bar of the Palace Variety Theatre, a known hangout for local prostitutes. He explains how he apparently rescues the girl from the advances of Alderman Meggerty, a local dignitary,
You saucy young filly.
and then set the girl up with a flat and an allowance. She then became his mistress. Naturally, both Mr. and Mrs. Burling are quite shocked by this and make futile attempts to protect their daughter, only to be given a reality check by the inspector, who reminds them that they too contributed to the girl's situation. Gerald goes on to reveal how the affair drew to a natural close and how that was the last he saw of her. Gerald is then allowed to go by the inspector as Sheila returns his engagement ring, and the inspector turns his attentions to Mrs. Burling. Mrs. Burling reluctantly agrees that she recognises the girl in the photograph she's shown by the inspector, and we then learn of Mrs. Burling's part in the girl's death. It unfolds that the young girl found herself pregnant and went to the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation for help. We learn that Mrs. Burling was in the chair for the girl's hearing and was agitated that the girl had said her name was Mrs. Burling. Obviously, Sybil Burling took great exception to this and not only refused the girl help, but influenced the rest of the panel to refuse her help as well. Mrs. Burling stubbornly refuses to accept any responsibility for her part in the girl's death, first blaming the girl herself, and then the absent father of her unborn child. The inspector pursues her on this, and his questioning techniques corner her into saying that the young man
should be made an example of,
and that
he ought to be dealt with very severely.
Sheila interjects and tries to warn her mother about the trap she's fallen into, as she, like the audience, have already worked out that Eric is the father of Eva Smith's child. As the inspector announces that he is waiting for Eric, waiting to do his duty, both Burling and Mrs. Burling realise that Eric is involved. The Burlings begin to attempt to deal with the revelation. Eric appears and the curtain falls. Act 3 Summary. Just as the end of Act 2 started, where the end of Act 1 left off, Act 3 begins in the same way. This time, Eric is the subject of the inspector's inquiry. There is a brief and harsh exchange between Eric and his family, which the inspector stops so he can continue to find out the facts. Eric reveals that, like Gerald, he met the girl in the bar of the Palace Variety Theatre. After some drinks, he took her to her lodgings, and even though she made it clear she didn't want him to come in, Eric confesses that he was
in that state when a chap turns nasty.
The suggestion, though not made explicit, is that Eric forced himself on Eva Smith, that he raped her. He met her again 2 weeks later, and she tells him that she is pregnant. She doesn't want to marry Eric, as she was well aware that he didn't love her. But Eric was insistent that she take some money, and he reveals that he stole £50 from his father's office. This revelation causes his parents to react furiously. Burling is quick to want to cover the mess up, and Eric is quick to point out that his father isn't the type of man he could go to with troubles. The inspector reminds them all of their focus, and Eric then finds out that his own mother refused to help the girl, leaving her no option but suicide. Having shown them that they all played a part in the girl's death, the inspector leaves the family with a stern message about taking responsibility for each other. Mr. and Mrs. Burling are worried about how they can cover up the scandal, whereas Sheila and Eric are more distressed about their own personal involvement. Gerald then returns with some news that suggests that the inspector may have been an imposter all along, as one of Gerald's friends on the local police has never heard of him. A telephone call clarifies this, and following a call to the infirmary, it is then revealed that there is no dead girl. Eric and Sheila are adamant that nothing has changed, whereas their parents are relieved and excited at the prospect of them being off the hook.
No police inquiry, no one girl that all this happened to, no scandal.
Burling and Mrs. Burling try to laugh the entire episode off, while Sheila tries to remind her parents and Gerald of the real issues.
Whoever that inspector was, it was anything but a joke. You knew it then, you began to learn something, and now you've stopped. You're ready to go on in the same old way.
As Burling mocks the
younger generation who can't even take a joke,
his speech is again curtailed, as the telephone rings sharply. Burling announces that the police are on their way to the house to question the family about a girl who has just died on the way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant. The play ends on this cliffhanger moment and the curtain falls. Burling. The character of Arthur Burling represents the opposite of everything that J.B. Priestley believed in. Whilst he is not necessarily a bad man, he is a capitalist through and through and places huge importance on his own social standing in society. His purpose in the play was to show all that was wrong with capitalist Britain of the time. Much of the dramatic tension in the play comes from his heated exchanges with the inspector, who, some critics argue, is in the play to represent the views of Priestley himself. Throughout the play, he bluntly refuses to accept any responsibility for the death of Eva Smith and attempts to justify his decision to sack her. His initial justifications are linked solely to profits. In Act 1, he asserts, with no shame, that it is his
duty to keep labour costs down.
However, a more sinister side to his personality is revealed when he explains his real reasons for sacking her, which was linked to her role as one of the ringleaders in some recent strike action. Clearly, Burling does not accept the idea that workers have rights, or at the very least, the right to strike. Burling's values were not uncommon in the early 20th century, and it could be argued that they're not uncommon now. However, Priestley's socialist view was that people should always come before profits, and Burling, therefore, is often made to look ridiculously foolish and selfish during his conversations with the inspector, and he is thrown by the inspector's assertion that
it's better to ask for the earth than to take it.
Burling has tried and failed to impress the inspector by alluding to his influential friends, and the audience has now witnessed Burling failing to gain control of the situation in his own home. Following his remarks about the Titanic being
unsinkable
and his saying that
the Germans don't want war,
Burling has lost all credibility with the audience. Whilst he is in the play to represent the ruling classes, it should be noted that Burling is actually a self-made man. Although he is clearly proud of what he has achieved, Burling is not totally secure with his social status, something he confesses to Gerald early in Act 1.
I have an idea that your mother, Lady Croft, while she doesn't object to my girl, feels you might have done better for yourself socially.
It is perhaps this awareness that forces Burling to constantly boast of his successes and achievements. Priestley informs us in the stage directions at the beginning of Act 1 that his wife is his social superior. We are also made aware of how pleased he is that his daughter, Sheila, is engaged to be married into the wealthy and influential Croft family. Although it would seem that the benefit to his business and his social standing are the real reason that the evening is one of the
happiest nights
of his life. Burling is also quick to point out to Gerald that the port they are drinking is the same as Gerald's father drinks, and also that he might be on the next honours list.
Just a knighthood, of course.
As a result of all his feeble attempts to impress, Burling makes himself look ridiculous and becomes an object of humour for the audience. The key thing to remember about the character of Burling is that he does not learn anything by the end of the play. He still feels justified in everything he has done, and his first concern is for his own reputation rather than the fact that a young girl who was pregnant with his grandchild is dead. When, towards the end of Act 3, they have established that there is no Inspector Gould, Burling, unlike Eric and Sheila, is far too ready to deny his involvement, and is equally keen to identify the one thing he has learned.
We've discovered one important fact, that fellow was a fraud and we've been hoaxed.
When at the end of the play, Burling receives the phone call informing him that a young girl has died, the irony of this is not lost on the audience. Mrs. Sybil Burling. Sybil Burling is the wife of Arthur Burling and the mother of Sheila and Eric. Priestley tells us in the stage directions that Sybil is a rather cold woman and her husband's social superior. She's a complete snob and totally unapologetic about this. When we first see her, she has reluctantly agreed to drink some port to toast the engagement of Gerald and Sheila, and quickly issues instructions to Edna the maid. She then tells Burling off for the social blunder he makes when complimenting the cook on the nice meal that has been prepared.
Arthur, you're not supposed to say such things.
The stage direction for this line is reproachfully, which gives the audience the impression that she has the tendency to look down on others. Mrs. Burling does not seem to communicate well with the other characters in the play. Many of the lines she directs towards her husband reveal a subtext of contempt, confirming the fact that she is married beneath her. Further, and though she has few lines in Act 1, most of them are interjections and reprimands, as she takes it upon herself to scold her family for their moments of impropriety. She scolds her husband for talking business, and she still treats Sheila and Eric like children. She is sycophantic towards Gerald until he reveals that Eric is known for his drinking, at which point she snaps at him.
And this is the time you choose to tell me.
She appears overly confident and assured, a reflection of a privileged class and status, and, in her dealings with the inspector, is openly hostile. She deems him her social inferior, and, therefore, has no qualms about lying to him. Further, she issues oblique threats and boldly asserts,
If you think you can bring any pressure to bear upon me, Inspector, you're quite mistaken.
Mrs. Burling, like her husband, is very dismissive of her involvement in the death of Eva Smith. We hear that, as a prominent member of the Bromley Women's Charity Organisation, she used her influence to make sure that Eva Smith's claim for financial help was refused. Though the claim should have been heard fairly, and was clearly a deserving case, Mrs. Burling used her position to deny the claim, revealing the truth behind her decision.
I didn't like her manner.
She is prejudiced towards the working classes, as we see in Act 2 when she says,
As if a girl of that sort would ever refuse money.
and openly admits to being
Prejudiced against her case.
Such comments would not fail to anger an audience, and in this way Priestley has reduced Mrs. Burling's credibility to a similar level to that of her husband. Indeed, unlike her husband, Mrs. Burling justifies refusing help with words that Sheila Burling. Sheila is the daughter of Arthur and Sybil Burling, and the family are together to celebrate her engagement to Gerald Croft, the son of a wealthy industrialist. In the stage directions, Sheila is described as very pleased with life and rather excited, and if we look at her life, it's fairly easy to see why. We're told that she is a pretty girl who comes from a privileged background, and she is to be engaged to a wealthy man who will be able to provide for her. It would be easy to dismiss her as a spoiled, naive rich girl, but as the play progresses, Priestley suggests that she has more depth to her than that. When the audience learn of her part in Eva Smith's death, we see the characteristics that would stereotype her as a spoilt brat who uses daddy's influence to get her own way. She has Eva Smith fired from her job as a shop assistant because she was in a furious temper, and she was jealous of Eva Smith.
If she had been some miserable plain little creature, I don't suppose I'd have done it, but she was very pretty and looked as if she could take care of herself. I couldn't be sorry for her.
When the inspector reminds her of the incident, she is horrified with herself and immediately shows regret. Indeed, she shows sympathy when the inspector describes Eva Smith's suicide and immediately accepts responsibility for her involvement.
He says it's one of us now.
Because of this display of morality, Sheila makes steps towards redeeming herself and, as the play progresses, Priestley allows her to become a more likeable character. This is also something that is seen in her relationship with Gerald. There is the suggestion that she had her suspicions of Gerald's infidelity when she reminds Gerald of the previous summer when
You never came near me.
And, though she uses sarcasm and even humour, she does not appear to get angry when he describes the affair. She does in fact say that she respects his honesty, and her reaction suggests that there may be hope for the relationship to survive in the future.
In fact, in some odd way, I rather respect you more than I've ever done before.
As the play progresses, Sheila appears to almost assist the inspector with his interrogations, and towards the end of the play, she even emulates the style and delivery of his speeches. She, like the inspector, offers summaries of everyone's involvement with Eva Smith. She questions other characters, she accuses and judges. She tells Gerald that the inspector already knows about his involvement with the girl, and later, when Mrs. Burling is asked about her involvement with the charity organisation who turned the girl away, Sheila urges her,
Go on, Mother, you might as well admit it.
Like the inspector, she becomes increasingly impatient with her family's pretences and hypocrisy. She tells her parents,
We've no excuse now for putting on airs, and that if we've any sense, we won't try.
Also in Act 3, just as Burling is beginning to suspect that the inspector is not who he says he is, Sheila says to him,
You're just beginning to pretend all over again.
We can see that Sheila realises the shallowness of their happy existence and the hardships others have to endure in order to keep them in their comfortable and privileged lifestyle. As she expresses her opinions, she is often disregarded by her parents. Throughout the play, her parents dismiss her as a child, suggesting that her frustrations are the result of her being hysterical and overtired. However, we can see that Sheila has matured. In the course of the play, she learns to understand herself and the wider world she is part of. She is shocked and disturbed by everyone's treatment of Eva Smith, and she immediately shows regret regarding her own part in Eva's death. Like her brother Eric, she is one of the characters who learns something within the play, and the suggestion is that unlike her parents, her behaviour towards others will change. Despite this, it should be noted that of all the characters' involvement in the death of the young girl, Sheila's could be considered the most inexcusable. She had the girl sacked out of jealousy, simply because Eva Smith was prettier. Ultimately, Sheila's remorse and understanding does put her in a better light than the others. Both she and Eric are there to represent the younger, more open-minded generation, and in this way, Priestley injects a hint of optimism into the play. Eric Burling. Eric is the youngest child of Arthur and Sybil Burling, and is described as an uncomfortable character. Priestley says of him that he's in his early 20s, not quite at ease, half shy, half assertive. He would most likely have some of the confidence that comes with the financial security that has been afforded him by his father. However, it is clear that something is missing from Eric's life, hence his drinking problem. The first mention of Eric is when he suddenly guffaws for no reason, and Sheila accuses him of being
squiffy
or drunk. More references are made to his drinking, which lead the audience to believe that he actually has a problem, though his parents are slower to catch on to this. At the beginning of the play, it seems as though Eric often finds himself at the butt of family jokes, as when the inspector's arrival is announced and there is speculation about what he might want, Gerald jokes,
"Unless Eric's been up to something."
And Eric clearly doesn't find this funny. No doubt he's aware of what he has actually been up to. He's assaulted a young woman who becomes pregnant, and he has stolen money from his father's business. He does not appear to be close to either parent. When Eric's involvement with Eva Smith is revealed, Eric says to Burling,
"You're not the kind of father a chap can go to when he's in trouble."
To which Burling retorts,
"You've been spoilt."
Ironically, Burling levels the term spoilt as an insult. However, if a child is spoilt, then surely the parent is to blame. A fact that seems to escape Burling. This exchange reveals quite a lot about the relationship between the two characters and the rift between them. Burling has worked hard to achieve his current status and, we assume with little support, whether financial or otherwise, from his own father.
They worked us hard in those days and kept us short of cash.
In contrast, Eric's life has been
so much easier.
A fact that both Burling and Eric seem acutely aware of. Burling mocks Eric's
public school and varsity life,
and this is something that angers and embarrasses both men. His mother also seems sufficiently distant from Eric, as he clearly didn't feel he could talk to her about his problems either, and she appears not to have the slightest suspicion about his drinking. There is clearly some built-up frustration with his mother, which we see when it is revealed that Mrs. Burling contributed to the death of her own grandchild. The stage directions reveal he approaches his mother, almost threatening her. And his line,
"You don't understand anything. You never did. You never even tried. You..."
confirms the distance between mother and son. At the end of the play, Eric seems to find some common ground with his sister, as they are both remorseful about their part in the death of the young girl. As the others squabble about the inspector's hoax, Eric, perhaps for the first time in his life, shows some form of responsibility and maturity.
"You lot may be letting yourself off nicely, but I can't."
He has proven himself capable of understanding, and it seems that this tragedy could be the moment where Eric will try to change and try to turn his life around. Gerald Croft. Gerald Croft is the son of Lord and Lady Croft, and therefore an aristocrat. He is what Burling has aspired to be all his life, and that is the reason why Burling tries so hard to impress him at the beginning of the play. We learn that Gerald's parents are not overly impressed with his engagement to Sheila. Gerald is marrying beneath himself. He is described as an attractive chap, about 30, rather too manly to be a dandy, but very much the easy, well-bred man about town. Everything he says and does seems to support this impression of him. He is older than both Eric and Sheila, and seems to have the self-assured confidence that comes with both his age and status. In spite of this confidence, Gerald is visibly rattled when the inspector first mentions the name Daisy Renton, and, like Mrs. Burling, tries to cover up the fact that he actually knew her. Gerald's confidence and self-assuredness comes from the fact that life is very good for him. He has tremendous wealth and social standing, and he's engaged to be married to the woman he professes to love, and so he has an awful lot to lose by the revelation of his affair and involvement in Daisy Renton's death. Of all the characters who are questioned, once the truth is uncovered, Gerald reveals all and then exits the stage as he says,
"As I'm rather more upset by this business than I probably appear to be."
It is clear that even though he used Daisy Renton when it suited him, he did have some affection for the girl, and this is even acknowledged by the inspector, who concedes that Gerald did at least make her happy for a time. Managing to get through the questioning with some dignity, Gerald returns to the Burling house after the inspector has left. He brings news that no one on Brumley Police Force has heard of an Inspector Gould. It is also Gerald who rings the infirmary to conclude that no girl has been brought in. As the characters discuss these facts, Gerald appears to ally himself with the older generation in wanting to cover up the night's revelations and return to normal, presumably not wanting to give up either his power or his privilege. The Inspector. The mysterious inspector is central to the plot of An Inspector Calls. We do not know where he has come from, and at the end of the play, we are not even sure if he was real. The only information we are given is that he need not be a big man, but he creates at once an impression of massiveness, solidity, and purposefulness. In speech, the stage directions state that he speaks carefully, weightily, and has a disconcerting habit of looking hard at the person he addresses before actually speaking. It is commonly thought that the inspector represents Priestley himself. He certainly represents his views. His sole function within the play is to make the Burlings and Gerald Croft accept responsibility.
This second episode in a series of videos on An Inspector Calls looks at the play's structure and its effect on the audience. At first it can appear quite confusing, but once understood it opens up a number of interesting theories about the play's possible meanings. This video will focus on the order of the main events in the play across its 3 acts, the structural features and points you could make about the order and timing of when things happen. We'll also look at the order of events in the real world. An Inspector Calls has often been labelled a time play. We'll look at why this is the case, which will lead us on to finishing with some theories and interpretations about what it all means. So, the order of the events in the play. I'm going to talk you through the play's major events in the hope that it's helpful to have them all on one page. You should avoid retelling the plot in an exam answer though. At the start of the play, the Burlings and Gerald are in the middle of a celebration in honour of Sheila and Gerald's engagement. Burling is full of himself and makes several comments which will turn out to be historically inaccurate, such as the Titanic being unsinkable and the fact that Sheila and Gerald were marrying at a very good time. They're not. War will break out in a couple of years. Burling then makes a speech on pages 9 to 10 which lectures the youngsters about how it's important to look after yourself and your family. This is a capitalist idea, and this is when the doorbell rings, interrupting him in mid-sentence. This announces the arrival of the inspector, who proceeds to tell the family he's investigating a suicide. Despite Burling's attempts to intimidate him, the inspector interrogates all 5 of the main characters. During Burling's interrogation we learn he sacked Eva Smith from his works for asking for a pay rise. This shows workers had no rights and he was uncaring of what happened to her. Burling refuses to accept his actions contributed to Eva's desperation. Sheila's interrogation is next, and the audience discovers she had her sacked from Millwood's department store for being impudent and smiling when Sheila was trying on clothes. Sheila reacts differently to her father and is shocked and ashamed to learn she may have contributed to Eva's death. At the end of Act 1 is a cliffhanger as the inspector reveals the girl changed her name to one Gerald recognises. His affair is revealed to Sheila, and with perfect timing the act ends with the inspector entering the room and demanding, "Well?" Act 2 opens with the same line, and there follows Gerald's interrogation. The audience learns he set up a girl now called Daisy in a flat, gave her money out of sympathy, but then had a relationship with her for some time. Eventually he abandoned her as it became clear he'd be marrying Sheila instead. This signals the end of their engagement, and Sheila gives him back the ring. Gerald is ashamed of what he's done and at least seems to feel some degree of guilt for his treatment of Eva and his dishonesty to Sheila. He undermines this later in the play, however. At this point, Gerald goes for a walk, saying he needs to clear his head. This is very significant because he discovers something while he's out. Meanwhile, the inspector interrogates Mrs. Burling, and we learn she was the last person to have contact with Eva Daisy. She denied her appeal for help from Mrs. Burling's charity on the ground she insulted her by claiming her name was Burling. This was despite the fact the girl had become pregnant. Act 2 ends with another cliffhanger as the inspector skillfully manipulates Mrs. Burling into saying the father of the child should be held responsible in public. Again, with perfect timing, Eric enters the room and Mrs. Burling realises it's her own son. This sequence is deeply ironic because both Sheila and the audience work out it's Eric long before Mrs. Burling does. At the start of Act 3 is Eric's interrogation, and we learn he had drunkenly forced himself on Eva Daisy and stolen money to pay her off and dumped her. Eric is appalled and takes responsibility for his actions, but both Mr. and Mrs. Burling try to sweep it under the carpet and seem more worried about a possible scandal for their family which would harm their reputation. The inspector's final speech on page 56 should be vital for any exam answer because it contains the message of the play and Priestley's views. The inspector warns the family that everyone must be responsible for everyone else or they face fire, blood and anguish. Here Priestley is referring to the 2 world wars and the potential of nuclear war. Once the inspector leaves, the family argues about who will accept responsibility. There is a clear division between the older Burlings, who still refuse to take any blame, and their children who are ready to face what they have done and change. For any candidates answering a question on responsibility, this would be an interesting section to draw quotes from. However, Gerald then returns and debunks the inspector, proving he was a fake. He aligns himself with Mr. and Mrs. Burling, and all 3 pretend nothing has happened. The younger Burlings continue to show they have learned from their experience. Finally, the phone rings and we discover an inspector will be calling to ask them questions about a girl's suicide. This will be the whole family's chance to get it right this time and take collective responsibility for their actions. Let's look at some structural features. The inspector questions the characters in the order he chooses for maximum impact. This isn't in the same order that the characters meet the girl in real life. Gerald's interrogation is in the middle. He neither accepts responsibility or fully denies his guilt, so he's somewhat on the fence. Each act ends with a cliffhanger which is beautifully orchestrated by the inspector. There is the revelation of Gerald's affair, the realisation that Eric is the father of the unborn child, and the sinister ringing of the telephone at the end of the play, and you get the impression that the inspector knew this was going to happen all along. The lighting is different when the inspector is present, harsh and bright like a spotlight. When he is not, the lighting is pink and intimate, as it says on page 1. This suggests that something is different when he is present. They are under a spotlight, being interrogated by someone who they can't control, threaten or intimidate. Here's the order in which events take place in the real world. If we look at this structure, we can see which characters had the biggest impact. Burling starts the process off, and Mrs. Burling ends it, and yet these are the 2 characters who refuse to take any blame. Both belong to the older generation Priestley blames for the state of society by 1945. Once again, Gerald's contributions land him in the middle of the 5 characters, showing that he has acted partly out of good intentions, but that in the end he takes little responsibility. An Inspector Calls is often labelled a time play because it seems to manipulate time for dramatic effect. Priestley wrote several works which played around with the idea of time. Something strange seems to be happening when the inspector is in the house. The lighting should be brighter and harder when the inspector arrives according to page 1, and it should change back when he leaves in Act 3, which shows there is significance to his presence. Are the characters in a limbo of some kind, stuck in a time warp? Has the inspector made time stand still? Does it restart again when the inspector leaves, which is